All right. So, John, thanks so much for coming on to talk to us about the legendary Bob Nalbandian. I couldn't think of anyone really more appropriate to chat with about him than you. I mean, you guys I know have gone back 40 years or so, maybe even more than that, when he was doing the Headbanger. I know you were doing, obviously, Metal Rendezvous out of the Bay Area. I guess just start us off, John, to talk about the first time, you met Bob and if you can remember. I know it's a long time ago, but what your first impression was of him when you guys first kind of connected with each other.
I knew you were going to ask that, and I was breaking my brains over when did I meet Bob, and I don't know. It's because Bob has become such a part of my life that I don't. It seems like he's been part of this life all this time, right? So honestly, I don't know when I remember. As long as I remember, I've known Bob. But let's put it this way. And obviously, we met over music. That was,
Sure.
the hard rock, heavy metal was his passion, was his life, and that's how I entered. Through Metal Rendezvous, through Headbanger, and it's one of the things that always strikes me about when I think about Bob and how we met and how we started to become friends and really got close is something that was mentioned a lot in the Bay Area Godfathers documentary. If you remember, many of them said, hey, we weren't rivals up in we were all friends, we're all helping each other. And Bob and I were kind of in that same relationship, even though he was down in LA and I was up in Monterey at the time. We just supported each other. We helped each other with Headbanger and then with Metal Rendezvous, and it just grew. We grew closer, and that just became real close friends.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because that was actually going to be my next question for you because, yeah, LA and San Francisco, just in general, are huge rivals. Anyone who's lived around either one of these areas know how much they kind of, I mean, but not really in a very, obviously, a malicious way or anything. But so that's what I was going to ask you was, when you had Metal Rendezvous and obviously, Ron Quintana was up here doing KUSF and he had this thing and his fanzine, and there was Bob down in LA. For one, was Bob really the main, I guess competitor, if you would say, or whatever down in LA? And really how did you guys kind of blend those rivalries to become sort of one cohesive unit where it didn't matter about where you were from. It really just mattered about the bands and the music, right? Yeah.
And it's funny because as close as our friendship is and was, we've never lived in the same place together.
Yeah.
He always been in LA, then he went up to North California, and eventually when he ended up in San Jose, I was already here in Texas. So we never ever lived in the same town or even as close proximity together. And yet our friendship endured. And it's because of what we built back in the day when he had Headbanger, or I had a Metal Rendezvous. And then, when he closed the Headbanger, he moved over to become an integral part of Metal Rendezvous as we grew it from the fanzine to the full-blown magazine later on. He was always there, always available, always willing to help, and that just stays with you for the rest of your life.
Sure. Yeah. Now, John, when you guys first started, I mean, obviously you could not have seen that this music was going to get to where it got to, the huge heights that it got to. I'm sure you guys were just kind of fans, but at the same time, at what point did you guys know that you were like in the middle of something that was becoming a global thing?
Obviously, when Metallica got signed to Elektra was a big kind of a point in the whole metal evolution. And then when we first published our first color cover, we realized that, hey, this thing can grow. I mean, keep in mind, Metal Rendezvous ended up with 125,000 copies print run. So when we did first cover in color, and it had a barcode back then, the barcode was brand new. It was like, oh my God, we actually have a barcode. And Bob was part of that. And we as we talked and discussed the next issues, we all thought, hey, this can grow big. And we got more and more people getting involved, and it just kept growing from that point on.
Sure. Now, we've been talking to a bunch of people, John, and everybody. First of all, the first thing you said about you don't know when you've met Bob, you just know he's been there forever. That's what everybody has said. That's the weirdest thing, is that nobody has said, I was at this restaurant or I was at a bar and I met Bob. They're just like, I don't know. He's just always sort of been there. And I think we're all kind of feeling that way because the one thing that he did I feel, better than probably anybody, was he was just a loyal champion to this style of music without being an ego hog. He didn't want attention. He didn't need attention. For you, as somebody that, you know, knew him from the earliest days, was he always that way? Did he always just, was it always the love of the music, or did he at some point say, you know, I want to be the king of publishing or any of that stuff?
Nah, he always did it for the love of music, and all the steps that he's done since, you know, whether it's joining Roadrunner, you know, the record label, or becoming a contributor to some other magazine. He didn't do it for the money or the fame. He wanted to get as close as possible to the music. That was his ultimate motive, and the friends that he made throughout all these steps in this journey, he also was loyal to them. I mean, that's the one thing that I need to add. You said he was loyal to the music, but he was also loyal to the friends.
True.
You know, I mean, when I exited the music industry in the mid-90s, a lot of my so-called friends I never heard from again, right?
Mhm.
Bob, no way. We stayed in touch. You know, I moved across the country to St. Louis. He stayed in LA, but we stayed in touch. He came to my wedding in 2000, and we saw each other. Any of my journeys, whether it was for work or vacation, when I was in a neighborhood, and sometimes the neighborhood was 100 miles away, but we always made a point to get together throughout all these years and just talk about the music, talk about the passion that we both had for the genre. But it's that friendship that really endured. Whether it's the music that held us together or his personality, well, I would argue it's both, right? You need to have both that really kept us and kept this friendship alive all these years.
Yeah, you know, I one of the things I did see you, put on social media, John, was that, and you mentioned a few times that Bob was, just echoing what you're saying here. He was one of the most loyal to friends that you've ever had, and you know, listen, and someone as myself, I've known Bob only for 16 years, which comparison to you is not very long, but especially over the last 5 years, you know, I just as close as I've gotten to him since he's been living up here in the Bay Area. You know, he really is a very loyal individual and friend. I mean, really as loyal as you'll get. He's very trustworthy. You know, that's one of the things why we wanted to do this celebration of him too, is really just not so much to talk about Bob and what he did for the music world, but really just as a person.
Yeah.
And you know, and that to me, just like with you, is you know, and just like with Chris, this is why we're doing this, is because we really want to express to and show and display to people, look, this guy was just an amazing individual and a friend, who would just trustworthy, loyal, all that stuff. So, I mean, talk about, just, I guess, expand a little bit about that with your friendship with Bob, you know, even dating back to, like I said, those days where, you know, you were in different cities that were rivalries, yet here's this guy who's, like you said, been connected with you all throughout the years. I mean, even my discussions with Bob, he always, you know, talk about you, and you could tell that, I know you were someone that he confided in as well. Sure. As much as anybody, I think, you know, that I know, you know, in terms of his older friends who, like you said, you know, down in LA, Orange County, I think he was probably, you know, more would confide in someone like yourself than a lot of people he did growing up with down in Orange County.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he trusted me also with knowing about his illness, has been struggling with for a long time, you know, and I kept the trust. I didn't tell anybody about it. That was his, you know, his battle and his thing to fight. And I always try to help him out, but it was the other way around, that no matter what happened, he was all there is to help me out, whether it was in the magazine, you know, to help me land a story or write a story, or later on, as silly as it sounds, pick me up at the airport. I could always depend on, if I'm stuck somewhere, Bob will be there to help out, right? And that just flowed throughout my entire knowledge of Bob. And I know I wasn't the only one. He was loyal to other people as well, and he was always driven by the lust for life with him, right? Again, to earlier comments, he didn't want money or fame or anything. He just wanted to live. He wanted to be with friends. He wanted to listen to the music. He wanted to go to shows. He wanted to be close to everybody. And that's what really impressed me. One of my favorite stories about, it's a weird story, but it in a way encapsulates this hey, let's just live kind of things, is when we were driving. I was in Los Angeles and went to dinner, and I had a little too much to drink. So Bob drove. We were going to go to Santa Monica Civic to see a show. I don't even remember who that was, right? It was in the late 80s. And we got pulled over, right? And Bob was driving, who didn't have anything to drink. And the police officer gave him the test, right? And he said, you know, I can't let you drive. And Bob said, I didn't drink. And I can't let you drive. I'll tell you what, I'm going to let you go, but you got to have your buddy drive. It was me who was drinking. And Bob just shrugged his shoulders and said, okay, you know, no argument, no, nothing. So I got behind the wheel. I drove to the next exit, pulled over, and okay, Bob, you got to get back behind the wheel. It's one of those funny stories but it just, to me, it encapsulates his I don't really care that much about even consequences. That might be almost too strong of the way I'm phrasing it, but he just wanted to live and go see that show and do whatever we need to do to enjoy that night.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and one of the other things, you know, just getting back a little bit to the music, you know, obviously Bob was, you know, obviously I always said, not even just music. This is outside of music too. I've always been saying this. He was the ultimate. He connected people so well together, better than I've ever seen anybody do. You know, I mean, obviously in the music world, he was, you know, very famous for that. Obviously, the biggest one being Marty Friedman with Megadeth, and at the time, I think Marty, I believe, was up here, right in the Bay Area, with doing Cacophony, I think, with Jason Becker, or he just moved over from Hawaii or whatever it was. But so he was always just connecting people. Didn't matter where they were from, who they were. He just had this real just gift of bringing people together. I mean, even up to the last time I saw him, he, you know, up in Reading, and here he was. There was a bunch of, you know, a couple of his friends coming up from Chico, and we all hung out, and everybody was always just, even when, you know, I met you through the Bay Area Godfathers doing the narration here in this room. I mean, he just always, you know, not only just connected people, but it was the people he connected you with were solid, really good people. You know, it's like he had this knack of knowing who was good, who wasn't, and connecting these good people together. And he enjoyed watching people then become friends through him, you know, which is always such an opposite that you usually see people. They, you know, you meet someone, if you become friends with them, they get a little like, you know, envious or jealous. Oh, that was my friend. And, you know, but Bob was just, he wanted to put people together and see their friendship grow together. And he would just get such enjoyment out of that. And it's just such a, you know, I don't know of anybody else in my life that I've ever seen that who was like that.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, something similar just happened when I saw him just in middle of December, just a few weeks before he passed. You know, he drove up from Orange County on his way home, and he stopped in Monterey when we met up together. And I took him out to dinner, but I invited a couple friends along who weren't even into the music. They were just good friends of mine, and we just wanted to have a nice evening out. And he clicked right in. I mean, he joined into the conversations, and one of my friends, just at the end of the night, he actually shared his illness with them over that dinner.
Okay.
And one of my friends just gave him the biggest hug as we separated afterwards. So he immediately made that connection that you kind of described with people he's never met before, and that weren't even part of the music scene or music industry. Right? They were just good people, good friends of mine, and he wanted to be part of that. And that's exactly the kind of characteristic that you just outlined there, Matt. Yeah.
Sure. Now the other thing too, John, is and you know, I know you were well aware that what he was going through for a while, you know, and as were Matt and I. You know, the one thing that really to me, above all this other stuff we're talking about, of the friendships and the music and everything, was the selflessness that Bob had, and specifically at the end. I mean, we all knew he was sick. He knew, obviously, he was sick. And I'm sure with you, every conversation ended the same way every one of our conversation ended with, but don't tell anybody. I don't want anybody to be worrying about me. Not that he didn't want people to know he was sick. It was, he didn't want people to worry about him. He was kind of selfless. And, you know, I mean, for you who knew him forever, that's always how he was, right?
Yeah. I can't add anything to that. You put it so well. That's exactly what Bob was about. Yeah. He did not want to anybody, even though he did share his illness with me, and again over the dinner with some friends, the last thing he wanted was any kind of pity or anything else. He just shared, and that's part of that openness that he had, was also part of that attraction that he kind of exuded, to other people and became friends with.
Sure. And I'll tell you, John, one of the best, I guess, gifts that Bob left us, in a way, is the documentary series, because the amount of knowledge that Bob had is never going to be replaced, no matter what. But he captured so much of it, you know, in the six movies, and Band versus Brand too, if you really want to get into there too. I just don't think that there's not many that had that kind of knowledge, and there's even less that shared it where it will never die. And that might be the ultimate gift that Bob left, was he left a legacy of one of the greatest times in the history of music that now will never be forgotten. And that's
I know. And sadly, we don't know what was going to be next, right? There was a quote that I saw. I was watching the last episode of Doctor Who, right? And I don't know if you guys saw that at the very end when she was regenerating again, right? She said, "I'm not afraid of regeneration or death. What I'm afraid of is missing out as what's next." Yeah. And that's what I'm missing now with Bob. You know, what was going to be next? Because all the adventures that we've had together, all the documentaries, the Shockwaves and School Sessions and Metal Rendezvous and Headbanger, if somehow he had survived this, what would have been next? That's something that we'll now never know. And I miss that, just like I miss him and his just him.
And just to wrap it up, John, like, you know, and I've told this to Chris, and he echoes the same thing. You know, the one thing that I really miss already, you know, and I'm going to continue to miss it, because I still think it in my head, you know, every time something would come up, or like a piece of news, of music news, or just, you know, just anything in general, there was so many things that made me think of, oh, I can't wait to tell this to Bob. I can't wait to share this with him, and just pick up the phone and call. Because the one thing about Bob that he was so great at was keeping in contact with people, you know, meaning like, even when you know, I had moved from LA up here, and he was still down there, and, you know, we hadn't seen each other maybe for a couple of years. He always was keeping in touch with people. I mean, I'd hear him on the phone even when I'd go to see him in Reading, you know, just calling people all day long, just texting them or whatever it was, emailing them. He always stayed in touch with people, and he would form these, you know, friendships where, like, yes, there was certain things you'd have in common where I just couldn't wait to tell him. And that's, I think, what I'm going to miss. I already do. Like I said, is I can't just pick up that phone and call him, you know, to tell him this thing, or I'm not going to look at my phone and see, oh, cool, Bob's calling. You know, he was one of those guys, but, you know, sometimes you have those friends where, you know, good friends, but it's like, you know, I don't want to talk to this guy right now. I know you know, it's going to be this kind of conversation. I never got to a Bob. Every time Bob would call, I'd just be like, oh, awesome. Let me pick this up. I'll stop what I'm doing to talk to Bob. And that's the one thing, you know, and I'm sure you did too, is that we really miss about, you know, Bob being around us. He's just not there at our fingertips anymore, you know?
Yeah. You know, to add to that, and his desire to stay in touch with people is, when I left the music industry and we did stay in touch, he knew that I was still a fan. I always been a fan, right? So always kept pulling me into little things, right? Hey, you know, do you want to do a little review for Shockwaves, you know, or hey, do you want to do a school sessions with me about concerts? Or he always kept doing that, knowing that I was passionate and it would make me happy. And that's what he wanted, really. He wanted me to be happy. And then when he asked me to contribute as much as I did to the Bay Area Godfathers, it was a dream come true for me that, you know, he really wanted me part of it. And I just felt so special and for what he did, and by bringing me in so closely to that.
Yeah, I got to echo that just with Bay Area Godfathers. He put me in it. You know, he asked me to do it, and I was like, sure, of course, because I lived there, you know, for a very limited time. I only lived in that area from 89 to 92, but it was, I mean, that's obviously the hotspot era,
right?
But he asked me to do it, and I said, sure.
Of course.
And I mean, one of the greatest thrills of my life was throwing it on Hulu and surprising my mom with myself on Hulu. You know, and that would have never happened. And Bob didn't have to do that. He had a million. He had a million much bigger. You know, the same movie with Lars and David Ellefson, and you know. And here's dumbass me, who's a nobody, in the movie 5, 6, 7 times. I was amazed.
But that's the thing with Bob. You were not a nobody. You were right up there with Lars. You know, as far as his relationships and friendships are concerned, and that's what was so important about what made Bob so trying to find the right word.
Special, probably.
Special, special. There you go. Yeah.
we can discuss the next scene, right? Okay,
Okay. So what are we working on now?
we're doing the kind of the metal and the record store section here.
Okay.
Yeah. So are we good to go to record?
Yes.
All right. The rise of metal gave birth to many European magazines. This inspired the launch of two highly influential Bay Area fanzines, Metal Mania and Metal Rendezvous. What do you think? Does that kind of
Perfect.
sound good?
Perfect, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
They were the two major players. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and I think we need to talk about the guitar players next. That'll be a good one as well. To talk about.
Well, we should also add in the section about the record stores and of course KUSF.
We need to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Let's add that right now.
We'll put that all together into one section.
In addition, college station KUSF's Rampage Radio, which was led by Ian Kellen and Ron Quintana, were also very influential in supporting the local scene. Is that good?
Yeah.
Kind of like that? Oh, yeah.
Well, the record stores
Yeah.
and with this.
And finally, now let's take that from the top.
Ready, Matt?
Finally, there were the record stores like Bill Burkhart's Record Exchange and the Record Vault, which made all the imports available. I'm not particularly happy with it. I think we may have to rewrite some of the verbiage and finish it off.
Well, I want to talk about the import, obviously the imports that came over, the European imports, and I talked about the local demos that they used to sell.
Yeah.
Of the, metallic and no left to leather and all that. So we'll come back and rewrite that part.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
All right.